since we are into the new section, I'm going to create a new folder inside my workspace location. Let me create a new folder with the name section 4. And inside this folder, I'm going to copy from the previous section, which is section 3. Let me go inside it and copy this UI project and paste it inside the section 4. Whatever changes that I'm going to make inside this section, they are going to be available under section 4 of the GitHub repo. I have opened the new project that we have pasted inside the section 4 inside my Visual Studio Code. The first option that we have to style our React apps is by using traditional CSS files and class names. In fact, this approach we are already using inside our application. Let me show you the same to you very quickly. If you go to footer.jsx, here you'll be able to see I'm trying to import footer.css. Let me open this file, and inside this file we have created lot many CSS classes. This is a CSS class with the name footer, and similarly we have all other CSS code. These classes we're trying to refer inside our JSX code. Just after the footer HTML element, we have mentioned class name instead of class because we are writing the code inside JSX, but not in the HTML file. To this class name, I'm trying to pass the class value, which is footer. Based upon this class name, all the CSS that we have defined here, they are going to be applied to my React component. This is all known information to you, but I want to teach you something new around this. Whatever approach that we are trying to follow right now, it has a problem. To show you this problem, let me make some changes inside my React components. Let me go to the footer.jsx. Here, what I'll do is I'll try to create React fragments. Into these React fragments, I'm going to move the footer. Once the footer is moved in between the React fragments, I'm going to create one more element just above the footer, and this element is h1. With the help of h1, I'm trying to display some heading. In between these h1 tags, I'm going to type some text demo of global CSS scope from footer. This is some random text. You can type whatever value you want. In the similar lines, I'm also going to create one more header inside my home component. Let me go to the home.jsx. Here also first, I'll try to create a fragment. Inside this fragment, first I'm going to save h1, followed by I will try to move this entire div into the React fragment. And the value that I have under h1, I'm going to change it. Instead of footer, I'm going to mention home. After making these changes, let me start my web application by running npm run dev. The application started successfully. Let me open this link inside the browser. Inside the UI, you'll be able to see two different headings. Of course, there is no proper CSS applied. Don't worry about that. For now, let's ignore the CSS and focus on the topic. This is the very first heading that I have, which we have placed under the home component, demo of global CSS scope from home. Similarly, if you scroll towards the end, just above the footer, you're going to have one more header with the value demo of global CSS scope from footer. Now, let me try to apply some CSS style for the heading available just above the footer. For the same, I need to go to the footer.jsx, and here to apply some styling to this h1, what I'll do is I'll go to the footer.css, and here I'll type h1. After h1, let me type curly braces. Now, inside these curly braces, I'm going to define some CSS code. The code that I'm going to write is text align with the value center, followed by I'm going to mention the color as well with hash 5b21b6. After making these changes, what is going to happen? Any h1 HTML tag that I'm going to have inside my footer.jsx, it is going to have this styling. Let me save these changes and go to the browser. Inside the browser, just above my footer, I have the heading. Now it is centered, and also the color is changed. So this gives a confirmation to me that whatever styling that I have performed, they are working. But now we are going to see the real problem. If you scroll up, whatever heading that we have under the home component, it also has a similar styling. But we are under the assumption, since footer.jsx imported footer.css, only the h1 present inside the footer should have the new CSS that we have created. if you go to the home.jsx, nowhere I have imported the footer.css, but still my h1 is receiving the new CSS style that we have defined here. How this is possible? Let's try to understand the same. Let me open the developer console and go to the elements. Here first let's try to open the tag of head. Under the head tag, you'll be able to see there are two style files imported, one with the name of index.css and other one with the name of footer.css. So with the approach of CSS files, what is happening is whatever number of files that you have inside your application, they are all going to be imported inside your main HTML page, which is index.html. So whatever CSS that we have under the footer.css, it is also going to be applied globally for all the applicable HTML elements. That's why the heading under the home component, it is also receiving the styles that we have defined under the footer.css. Let me open this div, and here we have h1 that we have defined under home. For this h1, these are the styling that applied by the browser, and this styling is matching exactly what we have defined inside the footer.css. So this is the number one problem with the CSS files approach. The scope of your CSS styles, they are not going to be limited to your single React component. They are always going to be elevated to the global scope. Inside your application, at any place, if you have h1, these styling, they are going to be applied. Of course, here you may have a question which is, instead of h1, why can't we create a unique class which is specific to only the footer? It's a great question. Let's try to do the same. Here instead of h1, what I'll do is I'll just type my hyphen heading. So this is the class that I have created. Now if I go to my browser, the styling will be lost because we have moved to the class name. And this class name, whatever we have created so far, we have not used anywhere. Let me take this class name and go to the footer.jsx. Here, just after this h1, I'm going to type class name, and to this class name, I'm going to assign the class name value, which is my hyphen heading. If I save these changes and go to the browser, the header component h1 is not disturbed. Let me check the heading that we have under footer. Hooray! The CSS style applied only to this heading, which is just above the footer. Whatever workaround that we have taken, it is working, and it is making sure the styling that I have defined is scoped to my own component. So mine is a small application and I'm the only developer. So this should work without any issue. But in real applications, you can't guarantee that no other developer is not going to use the same class name. Maybe today I have used this class name and it is working, and tomorrow some other developer comes and the new developer may use the exactly same class name in some other CSS file. Maybe let's try to do the same and see what is going to happen. What I'll do is I'll go to the footer.css. I'll try to copy this entire class and paste inside index.css. Let me open index.css. Here I'll try to paste the same class, but this time I'll try to give something else. Maybe I'll try to give background color. Maybe I'll try to select this some random color. Let me mention semicolon and save this change. And I'll try to use the same my heading inside my home.jsx. Here we have h1, and to this h1, I'm going to mention class name, and I'm trying to mention the same class name. So the same class name, my hyphen heading, it is present in index.css, and it is also present inside the footer.css with completely different styling. Now let's see what is going to happen. Inside the browser, if you see my both h1 headings, they end up having the same CSS style because they both are using the same class name. Behind the scenes, whatever stylings that we have mentioned in separate files, they both are applied to the h1 heading because we're trying to use the same class name. So this is going to happen in real projects as well. Since inside real projects, they are going to have hundreds of different CSS files, and inside these hundreds of CSS files, there'll be thousands of class names. There's a very good chance that some new developer, they may end up choosing the same class name without validating all the existing class names. Of course, they can validate before using the class name, but sometimes people can make mistakes, right? Without validating, they may end up reusing the same class name with new CSS styling. In those kind of scenario, we will end up with this kind of problem. I hope you got some clarity around the drawbacks of this option or approach. I'm not saying this approach is not good. I'm just saying while you are using this approach, you need to be cautious about these drawbacks. You will see some real projects where they are using this approach. If you end up working in those kind of projects, you need to be aware about these two drawbacks that we have discussed. I think this color, I don't like it. Let me change to some other color. Here, I'll try to use some other different color. Maybe this aquamarine looks good. Let me select the same and validate in the browser. Yeah, this is somewhat better, though it is not great. Before we try to close this lecture, let's try to quickly refer to the slides that I have created specific to this topic. Inside this lecture, we have discussed about this very first approach where we have used separate CSS files and class names to style our React components. I also have a slide explaining on how to use this approach. Inside this process, first we need to create a separate CSS file with the CSS class names along with their CSS styling. Once you imported the file inside your JSX code, you need to make sure you are using class name attribute next to your HTML element. Using this class name attribute, you can refer to the classes that you have defined inside the CSS file. That's what we are trying to do here. This is pretty simple, but I have given this example so that in future, whenever you are trying to quickly refresh this topic, it is going to help you. In the next slide, I have highlighted the advantages and disadvantages of this approach. First, if you try to understand the advantages, this approach is easy to set up and easy to understand because this is a traditional approach. If you have basic understanding of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, you should be able to quickly learn this approach and adopt inside your React components. Inside this option, we are going to write CSS code in separate file, which means the CSS code is going to be separated from the JSX code. Since the CSS code is separated from the JSX code, some other developer or some other person who is expert at CSS, they can work independently in developing the CSS styling and they can push the file to the GitHub repo once the changes are done. By using these CSS classes, other developer can style his or her React components. In this option, developers, they are going to have an opportunity to define their styling from scratch. They're going to write the CSS by using all the CSS classes and syntaxes. If someone likes CSS, they are going to like this approach. Whereas if someone is not an expert of CSS, they are going to hate this approach because they need to start from ground. They are not going to have any help from frameworks and libraries like Bootstrap or Tailwind, which are more recommended approaches. But not always all the companies they are going to leverage the frameworks and libraries of CSS. Few companies, they are going to be very strict on developing their own CSS. They don't want to leverage any libraries because once they start leveraging library, their website is going to look very similar to others' website where the same framework is used. To avoid such branding issues or public image issues, bigger organizations, they are going to encourage the developers to develop the CSS from scratch. These are the advantages. Now, if you try to understand the disadvantages, the very first disadvantage which we already discussed is whatever styles that you are going to define with this approach, they are going to have global scope, which can lead to naming conflicts or unintended overrides inside your React components. The same we saw in the demo as well. And to use this approach, the developers, they should have a very good understanding of CSS. These days, most of the full stack developers, they are hating CSS a lot. They don't like writing the CSS from scratch. For such developers, this approach is going to be a nightmare. The next advantage is around the dynamic styling. Sometimes developers, they want to apply styling dynamically based upon some properties or based upon some conditions. Such dynamic styling we can't implement if you try to define your CSS in a separate file. Because from your React component, you can't send the properties and conditions to your CSS file. That's why using this approach, you can't implement dynamic styling. Of course, there are some workarounds in the form of inline styles. We are going to discuss these inline styles in the next lecture. And the last disadvantage is if some large product is using this option to style the React components, they are going to have some challenges because whatever styles that we are trying to define inside this approach, they are going to have global scope. Sometimes name conflicts may happen. Sometimes developers may try to create stylings based upon HTML elements, and with that, all the matching HTML element tags, they are going to have the same styling. I hope you're clear. Thank you. Bye.